What if I told you a simple walk in the woods or being amongst the forest and getting lost in nature can help you reduce your stress, both in your personal and professional lives? Increasingly, more corporate professionals are embracing the concept of forest bathing, which I want to explore in today's conversation. However, before we do, I want to give you more context behind the matter. Forest bathing, or forest therapy, or more commonly known as shinrin-yoku, broadly means taking in one's senses of all of what the forest has to offer and the atmosphere it presents. It goes beyond a simple walk in the woods and centers on it's the conscious and contemplative practice of being immersed in the sights, the sounds, the senses, and the smells of the forest. It was developed in Japan in the 1980s, and in 1982, the Japanese made it a form of mobile meditation under the canopy of living forests and a part of their national health program. For my friend, Monica Sander Burns, she describes herself as a visionary thinker and earth intuitive who's on a mission to recenter reciprocal and healthy relationships with humans and more than human natural world of well-being. She began her recommitment to nature during the COVID-19 pandemic when she started her company, Society of Trees, where she works with organizations to align their workplace cultures with the regenerative energies of nature to improve employee well-being while maximizing their impact in a way that is sustainable with the Earth's capacity. In particular, she teaches people how to intuitively connect with our living planet by embodying sensory awareness and the embodied experience of nature. And she joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn about all of the work you do to connect us with nature and reducing stress, my friend. Great to see you, and thanks for a few minutes, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Kevin.
Absolutely. Now, Monica, I wanted to start our conversation by asking you about the correlation between nature reducing stress and really getting into a healthier place as individuals, and the correlation or relationship you think nature has in helping us to achieve that specific goal.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there are so many benefits that come from connecting with nature, like you said, and there's actually a really robust body of evidence that speaks to this. So Connecting with nature can improve your blood pressure, lower your blood pressure, I should say. It can reduce your stress levels. It can help with nervous system regulation, enhance your immune system function, self esteem, reduce your anxiety, improve cardiovascular function, blood oxygenation, hormone regulation and function, metabolic activity, inflammation regulation. The list really goes on. There are a few studies out there that I find particularly interesting. There was a study conducted in Italy in 2023, so just last year, that found that nature connection in the form of forest bathing, which is part of what I do, has a positive effect on vitality, optimism, and gratitude. Another study on COVID-19 frontline workers found that forest bathing improves sleep and helps reduce job stress and exhaustion. And a personal favorite study of mine is just about birdsong, and just even listening to a few minutes of birdsong, 6 minutes, have been found to improve our mental health and our well-being. So there's really such an abundance of research out there that shows us that we as humans and individuals feel better in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm wondering if I can ask you specifically about the power of resilience and reducing burnout specifically, because, I believe there are several benefits to optimizing resilience, and I know nature has a correlation to do that as well. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. There's so many facets of how nature can improve our resilience and improve our sense of health and well-being. Part of that is related to reducing negative aspects of our mental health. So reducing a sense of anxiety, reducing depression, reducing stress, reducing anger. So negative emotions. And then part of that is also improving our sense of inner resilience. And I'll speak personally for when I'm out in nature. When you are able to witness the diversity of different life forms that are out there, weathering different conditions, experiencing different adverse events like storms coming through or predators, whatever you name it, and they can still survive and thrive in their environment, it's almost impossible not to take inspiration when you really pay attention to just how resilient life on planet Earth is. And then when you realize that you too are nature, you realize that you can tap into a sense of personal resilience to weather your own storms that are rolling through your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point specifically, I know you help companies and corporate executives harness the power of nature to
Mm.
improve their well-being. So talk to me about how nature can help busy working professionals really find their inner center. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, thank you. I do help businesses and individuals work with nature to develop well-being individually and also collective workplace culture, improve collective workplace culture. I do this through my company, Society of Trees, which I founded in 2021 after my own personal transformative journey with nature. And Society of Trees was founded to use nature immersion as a tool to improve employee well-being and improve personal well-being. So we run workshops, we run corporate development programs, we run dedicated nature immersion sessions that use mindfulness and sensory techniques to help people really get the most out of nature experiences. Because what I always say is, I think any time that you spend in nature has mental health and well-being benefits. But when you combine mindfulness and nature and start to practice in a stillness, I think that's really when the benefits of being out in nature amplify. And I'm sure we'll speak to that later in our interview today. But in terms of our corporate development and our employee well-being programs, what we do is we take groups out into natural environments, we get them together, and we bring their senses alive using different activities. So we might get them to focus solely on the sound of their feet crunching on some fallen leaves, or we might bring their attention to the feeling, the sensation of wind rippling across their body. And really simple exercises like this, when practiced regularly, can completely reset our mood, restore our energy levels, even boost our creativity. So the cool thing is that even just a single session has an enormous boost of self-reported feelings of well-being. But when you practice this over time through a program, for example, they can contribute to some dramatic changes in a person's resilience, mental health, perspective, outlook, even their creativity. And when you do it as a group, you really improve communication, bonds, and a sense of connection between your team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, as you alluded before, you started your company in the midst of COVID when you were going through your own personal sort of journey of discovery. So I'm wondering, how do you think nature helped you in your own healing journey, and how do you think it helped us not get over, but move past COVID in a sense where we can get back and meet ourselves where we are? What role do you think nature played in that process?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Like you mentioned, I personally discovered the healing power of nature during the COVID 2020 lockdowns, which was a really difficult time for the entire globe. But for me personally, in 2019, I had just moved from Australia, where I grew up, to Canada with my partner. And we settled in the internationally renowned resort town of Whistler in Canada, BC. And this is a town that's really famous for skiing in the winter and mountain biking in the summer. And so my partner and I, we were working in the tourism industry alongside, Brits, Americans, Australians, Mexicans, Europeans, people from all over the world. And we had been there just over a year when the pandemic hit. And within 48 hours of the COVID-19 being declared an international pandemic, I turned 30, and 80% of my social circle left town. They all caught flights back home so that they could be with their families during this really uncertain time. And obviously, the tourism town that I lived in shut down. So I lost my job. My partner lost his job. We lost our income. We lost our social circle. We lost our sense of security. And it was a pretty turbulent time. I didn't really know what was going to happen. There was a lot of fear, especially health fear around. But luckily, where I live in Whistler, it's surrounded by beautiful forests, and I had nothing to do all day anymore but really wander around the forest through my home. So I did this. It was one of actually the safest activities that I could have done during this time because I lived pretty remotely. There was no one else around. And as I wandered aimlessly through the forest, I began to feel more and more like a child, like I did back home, wandering just through nature without any agenda, without any rush to get to work. I could really pay attention properly and start to notice all these tiny moments, all these tiny creatures, all these facets that usually I would overlook, and my thinking mind and my worrying mind would kick in and I'd miss it. But luckily in nature, I was able to really become present and just let go of a lot of this fear. And I began to find out what presence really meant. And I found that the forest became my sanctuary from the chaos of everyday life during this time. So I would make sure that I would spend several hours a day just outside in nature. And I really found it to be transformative as I began to learn how to really slow down, how to breathe properly, and how to be at peace. I was personally very curious about the transformation that was taking hold in me. So that's when I began to research the influence of nature on our well-being. And I found a methodology that has been called forest bathing. It's a methodology of nature immersion that I trained in, became certified in, and use through my company, Society of Trees, to help other people get this same effect. I think in our society, we tend to get caught up in the human world of busyness and getting things done and achieving our goals, which is really great, but we need to balance that out with just simply being and doing nothing and giving not just our bodies, but our minds a chance to rest and replenish and reset. An example I always use is in nature, you have 4 seasons. You have summer and you have spring, but you also have fall and winter. And fall and winter are necessary in order to get the productivity and the abundance of summer. So the same is true of us. We cannot be working or expecting ourselves to be productive 24/7, 7 days a week. We need downtime and rest. And nature is really a gift to us to help us influence our bodies and our minds to achieve that slow wavelength where we're not really thinking about anything in particular. We're just noticing all of the little micro moments that are happening.
Yeah, and to your last point, Monica, I'm also curious to ask you, I'm a big believer in the power of self-reflection and sort of
Mhm.
finding our personal inner center and reconnecting with ourselves. So I'm curious about how do you feel about the concept of self-reflection and the role you think nature plays in that regard?
Yeah, another great question. Um, what I would say to that is that there is a self reflection that naturally occurs when you allow your mind to come to a stillness, come to a center, as you say. It kind of naturally springs up, and you can really sink beneath the mental chatter, which can often distract us or even trick us from what's really going on internally. When that is able to subside, I think then we have access to a deeper awareness about what we are feeling, how our lives are going, how our relationships are going. And so nature really influences this state of mind. And in the nature immersion programs that I run through Society of Trees, this reflection piece is built into the process. So not only do we take people out and give them exercises and activities to stimulate their sensory awareness or mindfulness, we then bring people back together. And this is where a lot of the team cohesion and team bonding work comes in. We then bring them back together in a circle format where we share a reflective prompt that people can choose to answer that is really focused on their experience in nature. But what we find is that their experience in nature reflects where they're at personally. So I often say nature is like a mirror to our inner worlds. Our attention can focus on any one thing. And usually what it tends to focus on when we're in nature is whatever is going on for us internally. So, I might notice a situation where a tree is growing crooked. For me, I have scoliosis. So when I see a tree growing crooked, I think about my spine and I think about that resilience that the tree has to offer me by noticing how it grew crooked, but then it kind of wound its way back and it seems to be doing well. So, maybe with this chronic pain that I carry, I have some lessons to draw. So this is where the reflective piece comes into it, and it's a really powerful tool. So yeah, thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I also wanted to talk about your authentic definition of the word tranquility and how you really think tranquility can help us reconnect with our inner self. What are your thoughts there?
What are my thoughts on the meaning of
The
tranquility?
the power of tranquility. That's correct. Yeah.
I think for me, tranquility really comes from that concept that we spoke about earlier, which is finding your inner center. It's not really about being peaceful and being calm all the time as much as it is having the self confidence and the inner awareness that whatever trial or tribulation or problem that you're experiencing will pass. Again, I love the metaphor of weather for mental health, because if you imagine your mind to be like a bright blue sky, and then sometimes things happen in your life and a storm rolls through, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being caught in a storm. In fact, storms in nature are very necessary movement of energy, and they bring rain and they bring disruption and they help shake things up and clear the air. So storms are okay, but the weather, I think the tranquility comes from is that inner knowledge, that inner knowing that everything is welcome and everything belongs. So even this storm that is maybe difficult to experience, it's going to end at some point and it will have had some purpose in your life. So tranquility for me is coming back to that center and that inner resilience.
Yeah, and Monica, I want to talk about specifically about your company, Society of Trees, and the impact it's made in helping organizations and busy professionals really reconnect with nature and ultimately improve their lives. So tell me about the impact it's making and how proud you are of the progress of the company. I'd love to get your answer there.
Yeah. Society of Trees is a really purpose led organization. I founded it with my partner, Jordan Klein, in 2021. And as I mentioned, I went through this personal experience, and Jordan went through his own experience during COVID-19 as well, where we discovered just how powerful and transformative the practice of spending mindful time in nature can be. And so, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, I had just turned 30 and I was really struggling with finding purpose in my life. And I had this experience, and it almost felt like, well, it felt like a calling. It felt like the forest itself was really asking me to do this work, because I had this profound experience in nature, and I recognized that there was so much medicine here that could really be a balm, be an antidote to a lot of the problems that we experience in modern life. And again, I know my partner and I, Jordan, know personally just how important this work is. We actually met working in the corporate world back in Australia. And after a few years, we both really burnt out. And that's when we quit our jobs and moved to Canada. So we know just how difficult the stress of corporate life can be. And this is why it became our mission to go full circle and come back and support not just individuals, but organizations to really thrive by unlocking that transformative potential that comes from directed experiences in natural spaces, that comes from reflection, from awareness practices, from mindfulness practices. Because we both feel that if we had access to these practices, these techniques when we were working back in the corporate field, then we would have done a lot better and had an outlet, had a circuit breaker for a lot of the anguish and difficulty that we experience. So I am really proud of Society of Trees and the mission that we have. And I've worked with some amazing organizations and some amazing people, charities, nonprofits, but also corporate bodies who are really understanding that to get the most out of their team, to really help each team member and the team as a whole to thrive, they need to invest in the well-being and the connections and the bonds between people. And nature is such a readily accessible environment for people to work on relationship skills, work on communication skills, work on interpersonal and personal skills in a really safe environment. Even if you don't have the benefit of a forest outside your door like I do, nature is everywhere. We tend to forget that in the cities. Not only are there parks, there are trees, there are birds, there's whole ecosystems that you can connect with. So really, nature is wherever you're at, which is really cool, because whenever you need a therapist, whenever you need support, all you have to do is retune your attention to the natural world, and you have someone there that is an ally, that's on your side. So it's a really beautiful gift to offer companies and organizations that's really sustainable. And once people learn how to just shift their perspective in a certain way, the long-term benefits are enormous.
Yeah, absolutely. And Monica, you say you believe that connecting with nature is not only an essential aspect or component of preserving our human health, but it's also a critical ally in helping us sort of connect with society in a more harmonious fashion. So I'm wondering if you can tell me why it's important for us to really value nature from a health and society perspective. What are your thoughts then?
Yeah. My thoughts on that are that as humans, we co-evolved with our ecosystems on this planet. So we didn't just drop out of the sky or land on this planet. We evolved from a long lineage of ancestors, human and more than human ancestors, that have been genetically wired or programmed to connect with their environment, to connect with the natural world. It's at the root of our survival as a species. If we didn't intimately know the land where we lived on, we wouldn't have been able to survive. We wouldn't have been able to decode the patterns of animal behavior or seasonal shifts that helped us anticipate where we could find food or where we might be safe from predators. So it's in our genetic makeup, really. And I believe that as we have developed as an industrial, technological civilization, and we have introduced more and more points of separation between us and the natural world, we've lost this sense of closeness, of intimacy with the earth. And It's this closeness, a sense of intimacy with nature that really helped keep us in balance, because not only are we organic beings that need different natural phenomena to feel in balance, but you cannot participate as members of an ecosystem without an inherent awareness of your interdependence with every other member of that web of life. So it really highlights our fundamental species level reliance on clean water, on air, on good and healthy and productive soil, on a functional food chain. I think nowadays a lot of people might be fooled into thinking that, science and technology can just save us, and, all we need to do is invest in technology and we'll be fine. But we forget that everything comes from nature, that there is no us without our natural world. So let's even take an extreme example, right? Say that we upload our consciousness to the metaverse and we live solely in a virtual reality and we don't need, food or water or blah, blah, blah. But even that virtual reality has to be powered by something. It has to draw down on energy, and that energy comes from the earth. It comes from natural processes of energy creation that take place on the earth. So there's no getting away from the fact that we are reliant on the earth as our home for our survival, for our well-being. I think when we intentionally connect with nature, we come to this realization of this interdependence, and this interdependence of our physical and our mental and our spiritual health on the planet. And that naturally influences the decisions, the choices that we make when it comes to environmental activism or living more harmoniously on the planet. We begin to acknowledge and realize that the earth has certain cycles and certain limits that we need to live within. And that comes from observation and connection with nature. So that's what I believe connecting with nature offers us, is this humility to understand this place where we live, and that helps us to show up differently in our ecosystems and in our environments.
Yeah, and as I'm sure I don't have to tell you that we all experience our connection with nature differently. So, what do you think is the key to developing an individual sort of sensory awareness of what nature embodies and how it can improve our lives? What are your thoughts there?
Mm. I agree. I think everybody's connection with nature is very unique. And I think this is one of the joys of my job, is to create space for each person to connect with nature where they're at. Some people want to hug a tree, other people just want to sit on the grass, and they don't want it to be anything more than that. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. So that's the first thing I would say, is that there is no correct or right way to do it. There is only your way. And that is the first step in connecting with nature, is noticing how your authentic nature wants to connect. So what I would say in developing that sensory awareness and embodied experience of nature is pay attention to what feels good to you. It sounds simple, but it's really a practice that will start to disperse through your entire life. For me, I was such an overthinker that I didn't even know what I liked. And so when I was in nature, I started by noticing what my body wanted. Did it want to wander? Did it want to sit down? Did I want to touch this rock or touch moss, something soft or something hard? And the more I paid attention to what my body wanted, the cues that I was getting, it fed me information about where I was at. If I wanted to just sit by a tree, I probably wanted some stability and some groundedness in my life. If I wanted to wander and go and notice all of the little bugs or see what birds are in the environment that day, I was probably craving a little adventure or a movement in my life. So start with paying attention to what feels good to you. And then, secondly, notice what feels good from a sensory perspective. So, what do you want to smell? What do you want to listen to? What sounds are, are bringing you a sense of calm or tranquility? What sensations are you craving? Soft, squishy, crunchy, rough? The rest follows from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Monica, I'm curious to get your definition or take on the definition of transformative healing or deep healing, and how nature helps our both mind, body, and sort of spirit heal if we've had a traumatic event in our lives. So I'm curious, what's your definition of transformative healing, my friend?
Hmm. I'm just going to take a minute because I think my connection's a bit unstable, but okay, I'm back. I think so. My definition of transformative and deep healing, I think deep healing is really connecting with your natural state. It's embodying the acceptance that we are microcosms within a macrocosm, and that fundamental life force energy that transforms a seed into a giant oak tree, that creates underwater forests, that really shapes the face of the earth, that energy is also within us. That's powerful to realize. And I think when you connect with the power of the life force energy that grew you from a tiny little jelly bean in your mother's womb to where you are now, that's where the transformation comes in, because suddenly you reconnect with your power. And it's not an egocentric power. I think this is the really powerful thing that we're learning. The egocentric ego identity power is quite fragile because it's reliant on just you and your psyche. But when you transcend that and you develop what many can call an eco identity, that's when you connect with the awareness that, as Rumi says, you are both a drop in the ocean and the ocean in a drop. So you really connect with the realization that you are part of this grand unfolding story narrative of life on this planet. And that's an inherently powerful story to be a part of. So I think for me, that's where deep healing comes from, is that recognition that you are nature and that your body, your mind possesses the same healing potential that we see in ecosystem regeneration. That's available to you.
Yeah, and Monica, I know that you live in Canada now, but you're originally from Australia, my friend. So I'm
Yeah.
fascinated to ask you what you love most about Canadian culture, what you've learned about Canadian people, and what you miss most from being back home in Australia, my friend.
Hmm. Well, okay, let me answer the second part first. I think what I miss most, well, what I know I miss most about Australia is my family. It's really difficult to kind of live with your heart in two places, to live over here in a place that really felt like home from the moment that I landed, but also to have family and the people that you love so far away. So that's hands down what I miss the most. In terms of the natural aspect of Australia, I miss the beaches so much. There is nothing like Australian beaches. I had the privilege of going home last year and spending some time at the beach, and just the raw power of the ocean and the salty air and the horizon far off in the distance. It's just magical. And then in terms of Canada and what I've learned about Canadian culture, um, I find Australians and Canadians to be pretty similar. We have very similar histories. We both live in very um, rugged continents. So, Canada has obviously extreme cold, and Australia has extreme heat, and there are obviously a lot of extreme animals in both countries. People always joke with me about, how can you live in Australia? You have poisonous snakes and spiders and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, but you have bears and wolves and cougars. That to me is much more terrifying. So there's both that like really survivalist kind of edge to the history and to the people of these nations. I think if I could put it in a nutshell, it's a cliche, but Canadian culture is a lot more polite. Australians are very straightforward and I would say very down to earth. I was surprised that I missed that, but when I meet Australians here, I really like how, you know, they just say what's on their mind. And I miss that about home, I do. But I love being in Canada. I love how empathetic and compassionate Canadians can be and welcoming. I live in a place where there's so many different nationalities and it works really well. And I think Canadians have a very welcoming and inclusive attitude. So I really appreciate that about Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of food, I love to eat, my friend. So I'm curious, what's been your favorite Canadian food to consume, my friend?
My favorite Canadian food. Well, I recently just tried, what were they called? I want to say butter cookies. My friend made me butter cookies that were Canadian. Um, but you know what? I really, here on the west coast of Canada, there is so many different types of salmon available, and especially Indigenous cooking around salmon. And I've been trying bannock bread, which was made by the Squamish and the Leewat people, who are the traditional custodians of the land where I'm on. And that's delicious. It actually does remind me of damper back home, which was made by the Australian Aborigines. So yeah, but I have to say I do miss Australian the Australian culinary scene. And if you love food, I would highly recommend going to Sydney. The range of different cuisines and the quality of produce there is excellent. So check it out.
Absolutely. And, Monica, I want to end on a positive note. And I'm curious to ask you about what brings you the most joy in life. And when you look at your own personal and professional legacy, how do you want your legacy to be defined?
Mm, thank you. I love that question. I think for me, anyone who knows me knows that birds bring me a lot of joy. I get really excited about finding or listening or hearing different birds. I think just really small moments give me joy these days. Like the other day, I heard a barred owl calling from the woods behind my home, and it was 11 o'clock at night, but I rushed out and I was just sat there listening. They're really rare in my area. I've lived there 5 years and I can count on one hand the amount of times I've heard owls. And it made me so happy just to hear that owl. So yeah, bird stuff always brings me a lot of joy. And then I think how I want to be remembered professionally, I'd love to be remembered as someone who contributed to this monumental shift in how we relate to the planet. I mentioned earlier in the interview that a lot of the ways that we have developed as a civilization in the last 200 years have wreaked a lot of havoc in terms of our environment, but also in terms of how we feel. You know, we're in a epidemic of loneliness, and we have this really difficult sense of isolation and separation from each other that we can see play out in the political sphere, in society in different ways. And I think these two issues are interconnected. I think we experience this sense of profound loneliness in at least in part because we've lost that sense of connection to the places where we live. I know for me personally, when I started to learn the different rhythms and recognize the plants, the animals, the cycles of the place where I lived, I felt like I joined a community, that I felt like I belonged where I lived. And then this sense of belonging rippled out into so many facets of my life. I had so much more self-confidence because I knew no matter what happened, I had acceptance, and I belonged in the place where I lived. And I think if I can professionally help people to find that sense of belonging where they live, then that will shift how we relate to the planet, how we relate to each other, and how we relate to ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Monica, finally tell me, if people want to get connected with the Society of Trees or you personally, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah. The best way is to go to societyoftrees.com, or they can find me on Instagram at Society of Trees or Facebook at Society of Trees. Those are the three places where I'm at. And I'm also launching a podcast that is called Inner Ecology. So you can find me anywhere you get podcasts.
Well, I certainly appreciate your time today. As I told you before we started the interview, I think you're doing transformative work and helping people really reconnect and optimize both their mental and physical health. So I want to thank you for the work that you do to connect people with nature and for joining me today. It's most appreciated.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. And it was such a delight to get to know you a bit better too.